We have an heritage in the Ilan Ramon conferences to have not only NASA representative with us, but also a representative from the United States Space Command. So I'm pleased to invite to, as a next speaker, Major-General Skinner, Roubert's Skinner. The General is the Deputy Commander of the Air Force Space Command. The command provides space-based missile warning, GPS, communication, and cyber capabilities to the various U.S. commands. The command comprises approximately 38,000 people and professionals in 134 locations worldwide. General Skinner was commissioned through officer training school in '89. He has served in various tactical and fixed communication assignments, plans, policy, and resources staff work. The General has commanded at the level of squadron, group, and wing, and served as on the staffs of a numbered Air Force, Major Command Headquarters, Air Force Headquarters, and the Joint Staff. Major Skinner, please.
Shalom and good afternoon. Sohoraim Tovim. It's great to be here, and it's humbling for me to represent the United States Air Force to this international audience. I'm honored to be here, and thank you, Brigadier General Harari, for the warm introduction. This is my first time in Israel, and I felt extremely welcomed by all your hospitality. It's also terrific to join the terrific distinguished list of speakers and be able to share a few of my perspectives. However, I would be remiss if I failed to recognize the significance of why we are here today. From the dawn of the space age decades ago, humanity has embraced the risk and rewards of space exploration. Heroes of generations past dreamed, designed, and determined to place objects of technological wonder and our own frail selves amongst the heavens. As with any feat of this scale, the men and women that bravely slip the surly bonds of Earth sometimes do not return. We honor that sacrifice, the sacrifice of Colonel Ramon, and the sacrifice of the families of those of the Space Shuttle Columbia tragedy almost 15 years ago today. In some thoughts, it seems so long ago, but it was truly just yesterday, and they will not be forgotten. I'm always humbled when I speak to an audience of this size, and this incredibly important international forum is no exception. Even more humbling, you asked me here to participate in this session on technology and partnerships. In some ways, I feel like I should be out in the audience listening to you tell me the advances in partnerships and technology. So I'm trying to look for someone who can take my place for the next 10 minutes who knows more about this subject than I do. But unfortunately, the lights are blinding my eyes and I can't see anyone, so I will continue. My career in the military started in 1984. So when I think of technology, I think of Atari and cassette tapes. Who remembers Space Invaders? Probably about half the audience. When I joined the Air Force, when someone told me they had an urgent message to send, I had to get on a bicycle. And in fact, if I wanted to have an instant message, I had to turn on my turn signal in my car to instant message another driver that I was going to turn left or right. That was our definition of instant messaging. This is really an exciting time to be in the space and also the cyber business. The changes that technology has brought into the space business and the space domain is just as astounding. When I started my career, space was a domain for governments only, and there were really only two players in the space business. Now, space is an increasingly privatized commercial domain with a host of international players in both the public and private sectors. And in recent years, we've seen significant growth, and I would call the term renaissance applies well to the space sector because there is nothing, and I repeat, nothing we do in our business that isn't enabled by space or cyberspace. We've taken to calling this new space, and it's a great term because the old paradigms do not apply. We're really today at an inflection point where for many things in the space business, the government is no longer the leader. The commercial industry is out in front and moving faster than most governments can keep up. You could almost call it a tipping point. The slope of the curve for progress in the space industry seems to be changing from steep to near vertical. Let me illustrate this for you. We never thought of it this way, but if now we have new space, then it's fair to say that we had old space. So let me compare and contrast the old and the new space. Old space. The old space era, in my opinion, was hallmarked by three things. First, it was government-centric. Governments were the only ones who could afford to get there. In the early days, we helped the contractor design and build the rocket, satellite, ground system, and everything else. In later days, we paid the contractor to build the rocket for us, build the satellite to our specifications, along with the rest of the supporting infrastructure. Commercial satellite communications and other commercial satellite devices came along in time, but they didn't drive the industry, the government business did. Second, and this is a big part of why the first was true, space systems carried a technology and risk premium. Space is a naturally changing environment, so we wanted to ensure that if we put a system up there, it would be physically able to survive the harsh vacuum, temperature, and radiation environment of space. This means we over-engineered everything, driving the price of a space system astronomically. And lastly, we tended to launch things with a low risk tolerance to match the high cost of the satellite. If the satellite is expensive, then you naturally want to ensure that it reaches orbit in one piece. We developed an exhaustive system of mission assurance to ensure the rocket builder hasn't made any mistakes. This process, while proven remarkably successful for the United States government over the last 2 decades, significantly increases the cost of those space assets. And there are implications for system design if both the payload and rocket are expensive. One, you tend to pack too much capability onto one launch as you can. This means that your satellite has as much capability as you can put on it. Main payload and at least one sub-payload. It also means that folks who want to launch smaller satellites probably can't afford a rocket of their own, so they will pile onto your rocket. Ride sharing is what we call it, like the Waze carpool app, but for satellites. This logic train of expensive satellites, expensive rocket, packed with capability and extras is a recipe for high cost. Both satellites and launch vehicles cost in the hundreds of millions of dollars for a startup cost of billions if you include the ground system. So now for new space. And I'm sure you can all see where I'm going with this. In old space, the industry was government-centric. Now the industry is shifting to commercial-centric. Government is still a big player, and they always will be in many parts of the industry. But the momentum is headed towards the commercial side of the industry. It's been only recently that private equity has started investing in the space industry, but the slope of that curve has been climbing as well. 2017 set a record, almost $4 billion of non-government equity investment into commercial space companies. Think about that, $4 billion. In 2013, the world saw a shift in launch business, where the number of satellites launched that year almost doubled from the previous year. And this has become the new average. This is due to the commercial industry. Satellites and launch vehicles are only a portion of the expanding industry. Things that a few years ago were solidly only in the domain of governments, like a global network of space object tracking radars tied to a database of space objects, are now being commercialized. The second attribute of new space is satellites are getting cheaper and smaller. Miniaturization, like in the consumer electronics industry, is infiltrating into the space industry as well. This can clearly be seen in the expanding market for small satellites. One particular kind of small satellite is a 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter CubeSat, what we call a CubeSat. In 2016, a third of all satellites deployed were CubeSats. In 2017, India set a record for the most satellites on one launch, 104. One company called Planet deployed an 88 satellite constellation of Earth imaging satellites, and our options for getting those satellites into orbit is expanding. The third attribute of new space is commercial access to space is getting cheaper. In fact, I would say much cheaper. For example, to get to low Earth orbit, the commercial price of launch has fallen almost 90% over the last decade. We are seeing this in the commercial market driven by increased competition. And if launch costs go down, this enables new markets entirely. Up until not too long ago, if you wanted to launch a CubeSat, you likely had to find a rideshare, the concept I discussed earlier, Waze app for satellites. Now, there are startup companies who are building smaller rockets specifically targeting the growing small satellite market. And instead of hundreds of millions of dollars, they are charging hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not cheap enough for me to get a ride into space yet, but maybe someday. You can see this in the upward trend of launches worldwide. In 2016, there were 85 launches worldwide, and as our first speaker showed, last year there were 90 launches. In fact, in 2017, one company, SpaceX, had more launches by itself than most other nations. And most of the satellites launched by SpaceX were commercial, not government. The Air Force can see the trend, and by 2020, we are planning to support 48 launches per year in just one of our launch ranges, more than half of what the entire world did in 2017 at just one launch site. And we need to be able to capitalize this within the government. Since the industry is now driving us, the burning question is, how do we not get left behind? The public sector must harness this innovation and growth. I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts on what we're working on in the Air Force. First, we've got to focus on military responsibilities and core functions, not things industry can do better. And within the military, we have a hard time doing that. Historically, the Air Force has wanted an organic support structure to match our operational one. We have airmen to perform all the logistics and support functions for our operators. For example, aircraft maintenance, logistics readiness units, communications units, even force support units that run the base gym and morale facilities. We're changing the mindset in many areas. There are things that our commercial industry partners can do better than us, and it frees up our airmen to focus on the tasks they signed up for, defending and protecting the Constitution of the United States. I'll give you a couple of examples. Our communications troops have historically designed, built, operated, maintained, and protected and defended our information networks, our information technology networks. As you can imagine, our networks are pretty large, over 600,000 systems and climbing each year. And there's a wide set of responsibilities to give to our airmen. Over time, we've noticed that we focused a large part of our efforts on the building, operating, and maintaining part of what it takes to run our communications networks. But in today's age, where cyber threats are real and dangerous, we've got to focus our airmen on warfighting functions. As you will hear later, when we have a speaker talk about intelligence as a service, we're looking at something similar called information technology as a service. And we're using that program to rethink this balance. We're looking to partner with industry to take on the jobs they do best: design, build, operate, and maintain resilient networks. Our airmen will focus on the protect and defend mission, especially our mission systems like our space programs. As we see now, and well into the future, the cost of entry to affect space systems on the ground is still very low compared to the cost of entry to affect space systems from on-orbit assets. The other area I want to talk about is space launch. For the past several years, we've been working to transition from a sole source provider for our Air Force and national security space launches to a public-private partnership that invests in industry's commercial launch solutions. The goal is to have a sustainable competition between multiple launch service providers for each class of satellite and each orbit. When industry can compete for our launches, the competition generated from multiple companies vying for the service contract will drive our prices lower. Lastly, we focus on fully using the entire skill set available from industry. Historically, it's taken significant company investment and patience to work through the contracting process within the Department of Defense. Some would say it's almost at a snail's pace. So naturally, many companies can partner with us. We're now creating options for non-traditional contractors to partner with us. creative contract vehicles, accelerated programs, and even agreements with umbrella businesses that manage the overhead of working with the government, so smaller companies can come in and innovate for us without having to worry about that overhead. One of these, just awarded late last year, is called the Space Enterprise Consortium. In this, we use a lead company to cast a wide net so we can ask an ecosystem of contractors to help us build and solve problems and prototype solutions. Coming down the path are technologies like quantum computing, which our NASA rep just talked about, autonomy, artificial intelligence, hyperspeed technologies that will again change our future, both good and bad. I'll leave you with one final thought to sum up what I've discussed today. The bottom line is that it's all about partnerships. Today's space environment is increasingly complex. General Raymond, who spoke here last year and is my boss, often says that in the old days, partnerships were optional. If you could launch a satellite and have it survive infant mortality, then you were good to go. Now, space is increasingly complex and competitive. When you add in the other domains and look at multi-domain environments, the complexity exponentially increases. Like-minded nations must partner to meet shared goals in this new environment. We also have realized that public-private partnerships are more crucial now than ever before. We have to continue lowering the barriers to partner with industry. We've got to partner with industry, learn from industry, and grow with industry. History tells us that a nation with a strong industrial base and a coalition of international partners, like this conference represents, can win a war. But I want more than this. I pray that history written at this age will one day tell us that a nation with a strong industrial base and a coalition of international partners nurtures a lasting peace. With that goal, may the memory of Colonel Ramon bond our nations and drive us toward a peaceful future together. Thank you.